Hello friends, it's Kat from Meow Meow Kapow. If you haven't already seen part 1 of the Ultimate Brush Pen Showdown, you may want to click on that iCard or check out the doobly-doo down below for that first video. Plus, all the materials are listed down there too. To catch you up, I'm in search of the best self-contained, off-the-shelf brush pen for my needs as primarily a watercolor artist. We're checking a bunch of features of these pens to see how they all stack up. Things being noted are the overall price or price per pen if it's a pack, how long it takes for the ink to dry so I don't smudge it while I'm working, if the ink fades when it's erased since I usually erase my pencil sketch after inking, does it streak when trying to fill in a large space, how dark it is it waterproof, does it make a good variety in line widths, and does it feather, bleed, or ghost on cheap printer paper. It gets anywhere from a score of 0 to 3 in each of those categories, and then we add those up all at the end to find its final score. All waterproof tests, except for on the first pen, will be done over 24 hours later on my Canson Montval watercolor paper. Oh, and for the darkness test, I already lined up a small swatch of the darkest pen from the last video to make comparison easier. Alright, first challenger up, fight! This Pentel Pigment ink brush with a gray cap was about $7 on Amazon and is of the extra fine tip variety. It does have a synthetic bristle brush and does a decent job filling a large space, though it does have super minimal streaking. It's kind of hard to tell, but the finish on this ink is a little bit glossy, so it doesn't look as dark as the matte swatch in the darkness test, but it is. The dry time isn't great on this brush, but it's definitely not one of the worst we've seen, or that we will see, so it gets a 2 in that category. This Pentel Pigment ink pen was really fun to do a little doodle finder with, and had superb variation in line weight. I guess I'm just lucky or something because I feel like I chose a great pen on the first try again. This pen also went through 2 separate waterproofness tests and actually got a full score of 3 the first time around. But 24 hours later, I tested it again and it released a super small amount of pigment, so it got knocked down to a 2. I think that's just because I was really rough with it the second time around and truly believe that it actually deserves its original and absolutely shocking final score of 20.5 out of 24. Though for safety's sake, I bumped it down 1 point to what is still a kind of unbelievable 19.5 out of 24. Our second brush today is another Pentel brush, and I actually didn't realize that I had a second one at first. I almost thought that it was the same as the first pen because a lot of the kanji on the sides were the same, but the pen itself was blue. Turns out this one is also an extra fine brush pen, but it's a Fude pen rather than the Pigment ink brush pen. As far as I can tell, Fude means writing brush, and every other time I've come across them, they've been a sort of short, rubbery tipped pen that has a little bit of flexibility but is mainly meant for control so you can easily write Japanese characters, since they're Japanese pens. Thinking about this, I went back and took some photos of the brush tip of this Fude pen against the Pigment ink pen, and the bristles are, in fact, shorter. Given that this is a writing pen rather than an art pen, it explains a lot of its scores. When I tried to erase it, the ink itself smudged. The fill quality is kind of terrible, and the dry time is over 7 seconds long. The ink is decently dark and received a 2 out of 3, and it also did pretty well on the cheap paper test. It did smudge like crazy on my doodle finder test, which is to be expected considering its long drying time. However, it actually smudged even more while I was working on the doodle finder for the next brush, which was done maybe half an hour later. It was minimal but worth noting. Also, it 100% failed the waterproofness test, but the way it dispersed the ink in water makes me think that it would actually be really good to add some shading to ink doodles, especially because the original lines are almost completely eliminated when the water is added. I'd say stick to using this pen for writing. Its short bristles would be great for practicing calligraphy, but I think its score of 10 out of 24 should be enough to convince you not to bother if it's for art, unless you want to experiment with using it to shade. Pen, or should I say pens, number 3, were a real throwback for me. In high school, I used to use the Sakura Pigma microns for everything, and I'd blow through them weekly because the tips on their fine liners used to split in half or bend, and their ink was a dark gray even at the best of times. But they were literally the only non-ballpoint pen I could get my hands on, so they were basically magic. I remember when their brush pens first came out, and they performed a lot like the Faber-Castell Pitt brush pens, which is to say, horribly. Imagine my surprise to find that these pens were way different! They have little bumps on their caps to stop it from rolling when you put the pen down, and the quality of the tips of the pens themselves is way better than I remember. 2 of them are a thick, very quality feeling foam, and one of them is kind of a weird rubber thing. Sort of like what I'd expect a Fude pen to be like, but with slightly more flexibility. They got 2 points in the categories of fill, darkness, smudge, and cheap paper, but they got a 3 in line variety and price because 3 pens cost $8 total. Coming to about $2.67 a pen, and they each fulfill any line weight you could desire. To my delight, they're also completely waterproof. However, just like I remember the pens I used in high school doing, they faded a lot when erased and got a generous 1 point in the eraser test, rounding them out to a total of 18 out of 24 points. Pen number 4 got a couple of shoutouts from all y'all in the last video, so I'm kind of surprised at the result from this Copic Gasenfude pen. Perhaps it's because this pen is definitely meant to be used with alcohol markers as its primary companion rather than watercolors? This single pen is $7, which honestly isn't too bad. It does have some streaking in the fill test, and it's not quite as dark as our control swatch in the darkness test, so it got a 2 in both those categories. The dry time is over 7 seconds, so southpaws beware, this thing will smudge till the cows come home if you're not careful. I'd also like to note that this pen was the first pen I've encountered that has a weird consistency to its ink. It almost feels kind of like a gel in a way, and it flows out of the brush in a sort of heavy way. It's not unpleasant, it's just, it feels like this brand new brush is dangerously close to clogging or skipping, but it never does. Also, this was the first pen out of all of them that got a 3 in the eraser test. There was not even a hint of difference when trying to erase with both my kneaded rubber eraser and my little mono eraser, and I was honestly floored by this. All in all, this Copic Gasenfude received a 14.5 out of 24, which is decent, but not my favorite. The biggest blows were from its long dry time and the fact that it's definitely not waterproof. Why, hello there, first double-sided brush we've encountered. This Zebra Fude double-sided pen has both a bristle tip and a soft rubbery tip, like what I would normally expect a Fude brush to have. For $6, a double-sided brush pen is actually pretty decent, though you do have to consider that while it is 2 different nibs, they're both pulling from one single ink source. The streaking on both sides of the pen is pretty bad, and the ink isn't particularly deep in its black pigment. I'd also like to mention that it has that weird sort of gel-like consistency that the Copic pen has as well, which might explain why spoilers, it also got a 3 in the eraser test. The different sides of the pen perform differently in the dry test, with the smaller one drying quicker than the bigger one. I feel like this is likely due to the amount of ink each side is able to put down in one swatch, so it kind of makes sense. It did excellent in the cheap paper test though, and I would say very confidently that this is the best pen we've tested so far for overall use with a bullet journal. Because it has both the fine tip as well as the brush tip, I think it would be great for both fancy calligraphy writing as well as controlled and delicate lines, so that's exactly what I'm going to use this for in the future. Just, please, don't use any water with this pen. It failed the waterproof test in a really ugly way. 13 out of 24 is its final score, but again, I have a feeling this Fude pen was never meant to be used by a watercolor artist. Well, well, well. Here we are at the last pen again. Let's hope to go out with a bang, eh? This 2-pack of Pilot brush pens was actually recommended to me by a friend on my Instagram, so I was really curious about them. It's about $8 for both, so $4 a pen is a pretty great price. I do want to say up front that the big brush pen has the weirdest and coolest tip I think I've ever seen in a brush pen. The whole thing is basically like a really smooth, really firm, but still flexible rubber or silicone brush that somehow manages to make a really good variety of line weights without looking like the tip will eventually fray. This thing totally boggled my mind and I am all about it. The smaller one is just what I expect from your typical Fude pen, but the tip is still really nice. Blah blah blah, they aren't that great at filling spaces or being that dark, blah blah, and they both took a super long time to draw, blah blah blah, so they even smudged in the drawing while I was using them, blah blah. Also, they totally failed the cheap paper test and the waterproof test, but were also the 3rd brush in a row to have literally no change while being erased. Look, I'm gonna be straight with you. These pens don't work for me at all because they only ended up with a 13.5 out of 24, but I kinda love them anyway. I don't know, I think it must have been hypnotized by that weird larger pen's crazy point because I'm not even disappointed that they scored so low. I think these pens would actually be really ideal for people that just want something to sketch with, or to do their line art in pen with and easily erase in pencil underneath. I'm absolutely certain that they'd be a great way of inking for people who might want to color digitally or with colored pencils. I don't know how they fare up against markers though. This batch of pens was probably weirder than the first batch because there were a lot of them that surprised me in ways I didn't expect. Like, for instance, I'm pretty sure that last one has actually convinced me to praise the mighty Hypnotoad or something. And I'm really impressed that those Pigma pens are so much better than the ones from long ago. Which is why one of our winners in this group is the set of Pigma pens in the category of solid-tipped pens. I love the design of the cap, so the whole pen doesn't roll. The brush tips are way more solid than I ever remember them being. The set of 3 is a decent price, and they get an A++ in waterproofness. I do wish it was a bit easier to tell which pen was which size from the outside, but that's easy enough to solve if you just actually read. But who reads nowadays anyway? Weirdly, yet again, in the pens with actual bristles category, I managed to choose my favorite by absolute coincidence as the first draw. The Pentel Pigment ink brush pen was by far the winner in this group, and while it did take a while to get the ink to really start flowing, I had no complaints in any other category. It not only holds its own, it completely smashes the competition in terms of scoring. But which pen overall is the best? Which is my absolute favorite? Well, that sounds an awful lot like a part 3 video, doesn't it? What other features would you like me to test if we round out this showdown with a championship head-to-head? What's your favorite brush pen and why? Did I already review it, or should I in the future? Thanks so much for sticking around and watching me have these pens fight to the death. Don't forget to like and subscribe because it's the easiest way to help support this channel. Until I see you next time, I wish you peace, love, and a whole lot of pigment. Bye!